Hey folks, Valthanos here. Just wanting to put together a video real fast about the build that I used to complete Greater Rift 51. A lot of people were interested in the details of the build, and it's kind of hard to show because it's on the PTR, so I can't really link an armory or go in depth about it without actually putting some content out there. So the goal of this video today is just kind of walk you through the gearing choices for the build, the idea behind it, as well as skills and passives, kind of what really synergizes together to make the build function in a high grift format. So first thing I want to cover is going to be the changes to the Immortal King set. Now on live it's only got a 4-piece bonus, and in the new patch on the PTR it's been expanded to 6 pieces. Now with this 6-piece expansion it's come with a couple changes. I want to cover those first and then go into some of the gear choices. So first things first, the original 4-piece bonus, Call of the Ancients Last Until They Die, has been moved to a 2-piece bonus. Now this is pretty exciting for a couple reasons. One, it allows the build to basically be expanded. If you play a Raycore Barb or you've got your own little homebrew builds you like, 2 pieces of the Immortal King set will now get you permanent Ancients, which is just really cool. So it offers a pretty large power spike for new Barbarians on Season 3, for instance, when that launches, as well as being able to mix this in to other sets, as well as Raycore and the new Wrath of the Waste sets when that gets launched after its rework. Second thing is the new 4-set bonus. Call of the Ancients melee attacks also deal 600% weapon damage in a 15-yard radius. Now, this is really cool because most Ancients do 270% damage, or 540 if you use the Fire Rune. So this is a straight buff in just Ancient output for damage. They're going to be hitting that 600% on the target they hit, as well as splashing that in an AoE. So it's just a fantastic 4-set bonus. I really like it. It's got some interesting interactions with some runes and skills as well. And lastly, the new 6-piece bonus. It's what everyone's been wanting for a long time, super exciting stuff. Every time an Ancient deals damage, increase the duration of Wrath of the Berserker by 0.5 seconds. So yes, we can have permanent Wrath of the Berserker again, and that is super awesome. It is everything you dreamed it would be. I'm a huge fanboy from when Diablo 3 launched, and you could do permanent Wrath of the Berserker by spending a ton of resource and just flying around the map, whirlwinding to regen and just sprinting. It was awesome. So the fact that we've got permanent Wrath back is super fun. I really like it. It's probably my favorite thing about the IK set. So to cover next, before we dive into all the individual gear pieces as well as the skills and runes, I want to talk about the changes to focus and restraint, because focus and restraint have gone under a significant change, and that's basically defining my build right now, and it's going to be the reason I choose a lot of gear pieces that I do, and I don't have like Ring of Royal Grandeur or Unity. So to cover first, focus and restraint on the live server, they currently have the 2-set bonus that says every time you use a resource spender that spends resource, deals 50% more damage as long as you're at full resource. If that sounds complicated, imagine trying to take advantage of it. It's a pretty awkward thing to do. So they've since revamped the set, and the new bonus says that all of your damage is increased by up to 150% based on how much primary resource you have. So just to clarify, that 150% bonus damage is not additive, it's multiplicative, which means when you're at maximum resource, all of your damage is fed through a 2.5 times multiplier. I can't stress enough, this is a massive damage increase. It's insane. So this is really build defining in terms of its current iteration on the PTR. It offers more damage than any other ring combo currently available, and it's basically decided why I'm using all 6 pieces of IK. So knowing that, we're going to dive into the first piece on boots. Obviously, the primary stats are pretty straightforward. Strength, Vit, all res, and either skill damage or regenerate life. Secondaries, glow bonus is great, but the reason I opt for a skill damage is I feel that these kinds of modifiers can push your damage a bit higher, but if you're not going for a spender build, like you don't want to use Whirlwind or Seismic Slam, regenerate life is a great option as well. The next piece is going to be the belt. Again, strength of it and all res. It's a pretty consistent theme. If you're going to use a spender build, I recommend life per fury spent. If you're not using a spender build, percent life is a great option. Chest piece, Strength of it, and we have a little mix up here, Coda damage, Call of the Ancients damage. I feel it is essential because it buffs the damage your Ancients do on single target, and it buffs that 4-piece bonus. So your Ancients are going to output a lot more damage if you opt to get this 15% on your chest and shoulders. And obviously 3 sockets that it comes with, so you're going to go with that. Helmet is up for interpretation. You can change this based on your preference and how you like to play your character. But if you're kind of copying my build or you want to do something similar to mine, like a spender build with IK, you can go for Strength and Vit always. I feel that the amount of vitality you can get on a helmet offers way too much toughness. And then either a skill damage like Whirlwind or Seismic Slam, or crit chance with the socket. I prefer getting rid of the crit chance in order to get the socket and the skill damage, because you're going to have a lot of crit chance with the setup anyway, because both of your rings have the ability to roll both stats. So you're going to have a surplus of crit chance, and it's pretty easy to lose 6% crit to gain 23% life. It's a pretty big change, and I feel it offers a lot of toughness. Next piece is going to be gloves. Here, a lot of players will opt for cooldown versus vitality, but I feel on an ancient pair of gloves, up to 1000 vitality is pretty massive. It's a lot of health. So in my build style, we're going to be getting rid of cooldown where we can, for instance using amethyst instead of diamond, just to kind of get tough, get a lot of health, get a lot of EHP, and get to a point where you are very, very tanky, because we'd rather not die and have to use cooldowns when we set up again than just be strong enough and not have to worry about it. So this build is really going to drop a lot of cooldown in places in order to gain damage or toughness. So again, strength of it, and both crit stats. Secondary resistance is great, glow bonus if you can get it, like that kind of stuff is good. And then the last piece, the hardest piece to get a really good version of, is the weapon. Right now this weapon's required, but in the future patch I think we're going to have some flexibility with that and be able to look at some other options. But in the meantime, the weapon is what we have to use, so I opt for percent damage, strength of it, and a socket. It's pretty straightforward. It's 5 properties you get. You can't get 6 or anything. So I like vitality. If you're going to go with a spender build, you could even consider using life per fury spent. But I still like the raw HP. I feel like getting 150,000 health from your weapon is pretty good. After that, I want to talk about the pants. These are the unofficial 7th piece of the Immortal King set right now, and this is going to be changing soon. There's some mixing up coming up, but right now these pants offer Wrath of the Berserker all runes. It is an amazing affix. It synergizes with the 6-piece bonus to basically have permanent Wrath of the Berserker with all runes. It's seriously awesome. Stat wise, strength of it, all res, and 2 sockets. Pretty straightforward. Going over to rings and jewelry here, you're going to be using focus and restraint. And the way I like to build these items is main stat, crit chance, crit damage, socket. That's pretty much it. I mean, you're going to want to squeeze as much crit stats as you can out of your gear, and these rings both offer the ability to get both without having to worry about tough acquired items. They're not as rare as they used to be, and set changes are retroactive. So if you've got the IK set or you got focus and restraint that are good, it's all retroactive. This will reflect the changes on the PTR once it goes live. So crit stats and strength, or crit stats and attack speed, doesn't really matter so much right now, but I like strength. Moving on, shoulder piece. This is a dead slot, I would say. It's not exactly something that we have a lot of choices for. As you're aware, probably the only good shoulders that exist in the game are class set shoulders that drop, Og-Hild shoulders, or Vile wards, so we don't really have a lot of choices here. I opt for just stats. I like strength of it, all res, and coda damage. Notable alternatives are Profane Pauldrons to give you glow bonus and pickup radius, or Pauldrons of Skeleton King to give you that occasional cheat death, or Vile wards, which will offer Furious Charge, a pretty sizable damage increase if you want to put Furious Charge on your bar. After that, we've only got 2 other slots to play around with. I prefer Strong Arms. I feel like these are just such a fantastic bracer because they offer a multiplicative damage buff on monsters for 5 seconds. So if you use some kind of knockback in the build, you're able to trigger it pretty reliably, and it's a lot of damage increase, so it works pretty well. You want to get, obviously, an element of some kind, whichever you prefer. I go physical. strength of it, and crit chance. Amulet is a slot that you have a lot of room on. You can use any amulet really that you prefer. There's no best in slot amulet, but there are some that are better than others. Obviously, a very well-rolled immunity amulet like Star of Askenarth or Mara's are fantastic here. Anything that'll help you survive easier on high griffs, great choices. Stat-wise, strength or element, crit chance, crit damage, socket. I feel that crit damage and crit chance are really undervalued on an amulet, and if you can have both with either the element bonus or strength, is a really good way to go. I prefer Haunt of Voxo here, and this is a pretty interesting choice. You may not ever see this item used in high play before, but it's got some really interesting interaction on the Barbarian, and it was my mission to get the most value out of Amulet and Bracer possible. So by combining these two items together and using a skill like Ground Stomp, I'm able to trigger both items with one skill, and the skill has a really short cooldown. So we're able to completely get rid of cooldown on gear and not have to worry about it, but still be able to have maximum uptime on those other items. So that's pretty much my philosophy behind these two items. Obviously, if you have a really good Immunity Amulet or a really good Hellfire Amulet, that would be a really strong choice as well. The other reason I like Haunt of Voxo is the Shadow Clones that get summoned benefit from both the Enforcer Gem and Tasker and Theo. So there's a lot of potential here for these guys to do some pretty respectable damage, in addition to the fact that they cast Rend, Ground Stomp, Primary Skills, and Leap Attack. So their Ground Stomp will take your rune, the rune that you have for Ground Stomp. So they'll cast Wrenching Smash Ground Stomp and give you additional CC. They'll cast Rend for damage over time. Pretty useful stuff. I really like it. It's performed well for me since I've started using it. Before we start talking about the skills, last thing I wanted to cover is going to be gems. Now, there isn't a ton of wiggle room here for gems, and we're going to go over some advanced mechanics on a few of the gems. Right now, Bane of the Trapped. Probably the best all-around damage gem in the game, available for any class. Because we're a melee class, we're going to get near 100% uptime on that proc effect, and at rank 50, it's a 30% damage multiplier, which is pretty huge. So this is just a raw damage increase, gives you a lot of killing power, especially when you're pushing higher griffs with larger HP monsters. Second gem is going to be Pain Enhancer. Now, this is a gem you probably already use in conjunction with Bane of the Trapped on like a Raycor Barb, but this gem really shines in a physical Whirlwind setup, because not only are you going to be applying the dot all over the place, but the attack speed does something really interesting with this build. First off, Ancients will scale dynamically with your attack speed buff, so as you're pulling in all these monsters and getting all these crits, and you stack this attack speed, the Ancients are just going to start hitting harder, like immediately. So it's a free damage buff for the Ancients. Second, there's a really interesting interaction with Whirlwind. Now, the way Whirlwind normally functions is it has attack speed breakpoints, and I have not done the math, but some of the great people over at the Diablo 3 Barbarian forums have. And if you want to look that kind of stuff up, I'll probably post some links to it. But for this build, when you start to get a lot of attack speed, it will lower the amount of frames Whirlwind actually takes to deal damage. So it will reduce the amount of time per tick of Whirlwind. So what you end up doing is when you suck a massive pile of monsters together and you start getting crits, you're going to see your damage shoot up really quickly. It'll go up 20, 30, 40% almost right away. You need to stop channeling Whirlwind and then begin rechanneling. That snapshots the increased attack speed bonus and lowers the amount of frames it takes Whirlwind to deal damage. That's the only thing that you can snapshot on Whirlwind. So taking advantage of that is a hard skill to learn, something you have to train yourself to do, but it is really noticeable, especially if you have very dense rifts or lots and lots of monsters. You're able to really take advantage of it. Last gem is Enforcer. Now, I don't know if this one is getting a lot of play right now. I imagine it is for IK barbs, but it serves two purposes. It's raw damage increase, works with Ancients and the Haunt of Voxo clones. It also grants your Ancients 25% less damage taken. So this is, I think, very critical for keeping your Ancients alive. If you don't have some kind of mitigation for them, the Ancients can die pretty quick. And if you are using a setup like I am, your Ancients are critical for the build to function. If the Ancients die, the build crumbles and you're miserable. The other effect of not having some kind of mitigation is if 1 or 2 ancients are dying and you're casting the skill to resummon them, you're going to put the skill on cooldown. So then if you die, now the skill's on cooldown, you just have to wait. So that's part of the high risk part of the game, and the build itself is you're basically getting rid of cooldown for other stats. So if you do make mistakes, they're pretty punishing. But that's my idea on the gems. I really like Bane of the Trapped and Pain Enhancer. These are 2 gems I'll probably never change. But if you're going to be running lower Griffs or T6 with your friends, you can change Enforcer for anything that you prefer. Toxin, Wreath of Lightning, whatever it is. It's not very important. But high Griff progression, I always recommend Enforcer. So now, to talk about the skills a little bit, I'm going to have a skill calculator at the bottom in the description, so you guys can look at this anytime. But first off, I want to talk about Wrath of the Berserker, because we're going to be gaining all runes, and I want you guys to understand what runes we're gaining and how important they actually are. So, first and foremost, Ariat's Wail is a 3400% weapon damage activation in 15 yards. Pretty lackluster. You don't ever really want to use Wrath of the Berserker to deal damage, because that 3400%, it's not really sizable. That's not huge. It's not a game-changing amount of damage. Insanity. While active, gain 50% increased damage. You probably already used this rune on live, you probably use it on the PTR too, probably love it like I do. However, this rune has changed, and it's changed in a really, really good way. On live, it gives you 50% increased damage, but it's additive bonus. On the PTR, it's multiplicative, which is freaking great. So it's literally a raw damage buff for the rune. It's much more potent on the PTR. Slaughter. Now, this rune is, I feel, really underappreciated because your critical hits cause an explosion of blood, dealing 300% weapon damage in a 15-yard AoE. Now, when you use this skill with something like Whirlwind, every single time you're critting with Whirlwind, which has a really, really quick attack rate, and if you snapshot the faster attack speed, it's even quicker, every crit is going to deal 300% weapon damage. So it takes Whirlwind's base damage of like 320, and it just multiplies it exponentially based on how many monsters are around you. So the build really thrives on density and lots of monsters in a small place to trigger slaughter, and it really does quite a respectable amount of damage. The next rune, actually both of these runes, are literally Ignore Pain, Ignorance is Bliss baked into these 2 runes, so you get 50% damage reduction and 5.3k life per fury spent. So these 2 runes are literally what Ignore Pain does with Ignorance is Bliss. So you get a unity in a bottle, and you get a ridiculous amount of healing as you spend fury. So that's one of the reasons I opt for a spender in the build, is to take advantage of this rune right here and keep myself healthy. Next skill I want to talk about is Call the Ancients. You've got a lot of different options for runes based on what you see here, and I'm going to talk about a couple of them. So first and foremost, I want to talk about Together as One. This is what most people would consider another massive damage reduction. You basically take 50% reduced damage, and it's then split and sent to your Ancients. Now, this is a really great rune for a hardcore setup. If you're running hardcore and you want that extra toughness, 2 pieces of IK and Together as One is a unity for free. It's a massive toughness increase. When you start to push high griffs, you got to be really mindful about how much damage you're actually taking, though, because the damage that gets shared over to your Ancients can and will kill them. So if you're doing like T6 or low grift, no problem. Together as One's a great choice. Hardcore player, keep you alive, no issues. The next rune I want to talk about is probably the most popular rune for Raycore Barbarians on the live server. It's Council Rises. This does something interesting. It gives your Ancients double damage versus the other runes. It goes from 270 to 540. It's a pretty substantial increase. It's not quite as substantial as it once was, because now your Ancients deal 600% weapon damage with all attacks. So this, for instance, like the normal rune is 270. So now they will always do 870 on the target they hit. So instead of it being a flat double, it's not quite as strong as it was, but one of the differences, and one I think of the most important differences, is they stop casting their abilities. So they won't run around and do Whirlwind and Leap Attack and stuff as much. They're just going to like auto attack things, which means you're always going to do that 540 every time. Next rune is Duty to the Clan. Little bugged right now. Says it does cold damage, actually does lightning damage, but it causes chill and increases chance to be critically hit. I don't think this rune is going to get a tremendous amount of use for most of the mainstream builds. It might have its uses in other ways, but I don't really see it getting a ton of use for the average high grip progression build. Next is Ancient's Blessing. This is a good rune in disguise, but I have trouble finding a way to optimize for it. Basically allows your Ancients to heal for 966 life for every point of fury you spend. So it heals you and them pretty well, actually. So it's a good way to keep your Ancients healthy, but I find with the other options we have, it's not quite as good. Ancient's Fury is the rune that I prefer. It basically causes your Ancients to generate 4 Fury every time they deal damage. Now, that's a little misleading. It says every time they deal damage, but it's got an interesting interaction with the Immortal King's 4-piece bonus. The 4-piece bonus makes them do AoE damage, and what ends up actually occurring is the Ancients will generate 4 Fury per enemy hit, which means that if you run that rune like I do, the Ancients will keep your Fury maximum always. In a higher grift environment where monsters don't die instantaneously, the Ancients will always keep you topped off at full Fury, so you always benefit from Focus and Restraint. You always benefit from passives like Berserker Rage. You can Whirlwind forever, and you can spam Battle Rage to heal yourself with life per Fury spent. The next couple of skills I want to cover, because these two are pretty much required, Call of the Ancients and Wrath of the Berserker. You'd be crazy to go play without them if you're running IK. There's 4 other skills you can pick from, slots really, to choose whatever you want. Now, in my build, I'm using a physical-based spender build, focusing on Whirlwind. So obviously, Whirlwind is in my build, and I prefer the Dust Devils rune. Reason for this is, we've already talked about how Pain Enhancer increases its attacks per second, but Whirlwind itself is constantly spending Fury, and when you snapshot that faster attacks per second, you're actually going to heal quicker, because you're going to be spending more resource. On top of the fact that you're going to be generating these tornadoes, they're going to travel around the screen, and they're going to spread more Pain Enhancer dot. So I really like this rune. I get a lot of good performance out of it, and when you try to use other runes, I don't feel like they're worthwhile. Wind Shear is pretty much worthless in the build because your Ancients are keeping your Fury maxed. Volcanic Eruption is just like a raw damage increase, but going from 340 to 400, it's not that big of a deal. Blood Funnel, I've tested. It does offer pretty good healing, but it's affected by proc coefficient, I think, and it doesn't offer as much as you think it would. Hurricane is probably the only other really good option, but it's got limited use on elites and Rift Guardians, and most monsters become immune to the pull after they've been pulled for 5 seconds. So it's really good if you don't want to run some kind of gather mechanic on another skill and you just want to use Hurricane to pull everything, but otherwise I still prefer to use Dust Devils. Next skill I choose is Ground Stomp with Wrenching Smash. We've already talked about how it synergizes with Haunt of Voxo and Strong Arms, but I really like the way Ground Stomp pulls monsters in and stuns them. Most important part about the skill is not the fact that it procs the 2 items I use or it pulls them together, it's the fact that it stuns them for 4 seconds. This is critical in high grifts because you actually take a ton of damage from monsters. So if you try to Whirlwind into like 20 zombies, they'll just beat the crap out of you and you'll die in like 2 seconds. So the ability to stun the monsters and give you free time to just spin, it can't be valued enough. I mean, I really like it. It's only kept me alive and helped me progress. So it's one of my favorite skills in the build. Next, you've got 2 other slots. I prefer Shouts for both of these. I like Warcry Impunity because it's going to offer you a ton of resistance. Just to give you an idea with my stats where they are right now, I've got 1 million HP, and these are my resistances, this is my armor, 26 million sheet toughness. Just using Warcry, it brings me from 26 to 34 million, so it's an 8 million increase on sheet toughness, and it gives the Ancients toughness. They get armor and resistance as well. So I really like this skill. I really like the rune. Most people change this on Raycor Barb for something like Ignore Pain. You can definitely do that, but because we don't focus on cooldown, it might not be as good as it performs for Raycor. So I like Warcry. It's constant buff. It performs pretty good for me. Lastly, Battle Rage. Battle Rage with Bloodshed is a linchpin in the build. Similar to Wrath of the Berserker with Slaughter, Battle Rage Bloodshed scales infinitely. So it basically says that crits cause an explosion of blood, dealing 20% of the damage done to all nearby enemies. The way it scales infinitely is as long as your damage is increasing, the harder you're hitting, this will always do 20%. So if your damage goes up, the critical explosions go up. They hit harder. So one of my favorite skills, and when you combine it with Slaughter, the AoE damage output is tremendous. Just myself with Whirlwind can ground stomp and pull a pack and just evaporate it without even the Ancients helping me on Grift 50 and 51. So I feel like that rune is critical for the build. If you're not running a spender or you're having problems keeping alive, Sword of the Plowshares is great because critical hits have 8% chance to get globes, so it'll keep you alive, generate globes to heal the Ancients, so it's a very good choice as well. Marauder's Rage is something you would pick if you are not using the spender. If you're just going for raw damage and you're like a pet-centric build, Marauder's Rage is a good choice. So that wraps up the skills. Just to talk about passives really briefly, we're getting really greedy with the passives. Most of these are just raw damage increases. So I'm actually using Rampage here. So these are just raw damage increases. So first one I wanted to talk about is Rampage. If you're going for the greedy play like I am and using all rubies, Rampage is great. It serves no purpose on a Rift Guardian, unless it's a Rift Guardian like Saxtress or the Spider Queen, the Binder, that summon adds, but by and large, most Rift Guardians are a big wad of meat you gotta kill, so you won't get a lot of bonus out of Rampage. But when you're clearing trash, the amount of strength it gives you is fantastic, 25%. When you have as much strength as I do, at 11,000, you end up getting up to like 14,000 strength, so it's a massive increase and gives you tons of damage and toughness, so I really, really like this one. It kind of adds a bit of urgency to the build to try to chain together your stacks once you're at 25. Ruthless, again, this is another shameful grab at damage. Higher Grifts, I feel that this skill is potent because most monsters take a lot longer to kill, so the bonus damage goes a lot further. T6 and low Grifts probably won't need it because you're going to kill everything so fast anyway, it won't really need any usage, but high Grifts, it really helps seal the deal in terms of finishing off a Rift Guardian or killing an elite. Berserker Rage, again, another shameless grab at damage. You're always going to have Max Fury if you run the Call of the Ancients rune that I do, so having Max Fury, 25% additional multiplicative damage, who doesn't like free damage, right? And then the last one, that passive that I choose, and one that I think is debated, but I feel pretty strongly that it's very good, is Inspiring Presence. Now, the first thing it does is double the duration of your shouts. Big deal, nobody cares, you can recast them as many times as you want, it's not an issue. The second bonus is all of your allies and yourself regenerate 2% max life per second for 60 seconds. Now, that doesn't sound like a lot. It only gives me something like 40,000 health regen, which is pretty good amount, but, or I'm sorry, 20,000 health regen, which is a pretty good amount, but it's not for me. This is for the Ancients, because the Ancients take significantly reduced damage, and they don't actively heal anything unless you pick up globes. So using Inspiring Presence is the only reliable way to give them substantial healing. So if you combine Enforcer Gem with Inspiring Presence, your Ancients are basically invincible up to even Griff 52, which is about as high as I've gotten. So I highly, highly recommend this passive if you're pushing past Griff 45. It'll give your Ancients the boost that they need to take lots and lots of damage and still come out on top and not die. So that's the rundown for item choices as well as skill choices, kind of where the synergy comes in and the way that I like to build. Again, a lot of this will change if you go for a spenderless pet build, but hopefully I've covered a bit about what alternatives there are. Just to cover super briefly, Paragon. If you're playing like I am, movement speed to 25%, and then a super greedy grab at all strength. If you are struggling with your HP pool, I'm not right now, I've got 1 million. But if you're struggling with your HP pool, I recommend somewhere in the 500 to 600k range if you're trying to push, mid 40 grips. You can obviously dump some into Vitality. In the offense section, we're going to be focusing on crit chance, crit damage first. And the math behind this is, well, it's not math, but the philosophy behind this is a 1 to 10 ratio. So in your sheet, for every 1% crit chance, you want 10% crit damage. So if you have 40% crit chance and 350% crit damage, obviously you'd max crit damage first. You want to try to keep these as close as you can as possible. Once you've maxed both of these out, I dump the rest into attack speed, cooldown as a final dump. We don't really focus on cooldown in this build, and attack speed will take us a lot further. In defense, my order is resist all, followed by percent life, followed by armor, and then dump the rest in life regen. Life regen's pretty weak for us because it only caps at 10,000, which is a pretty minuscule amount. Utility, area damage and life on hit. No resource cost reduction. The reason we don't get any resource cost reduction is it actively reduces the amount you heal by if you use a spender. So if I'm casting Battle Rage and it costs 20 Fury, I have 10% resource cost reduction. We're going to cut 2 Fury off that. That's 10,000 health I just lost every time I cast it. So 20 Fury at 5k life per second will end up giving you like 80k healing. Or I'm sorry, like 100k healing. And if you get any resource cost reduction, it's going to actively reduce the amount you heal by. So we don't want any resource cost reduction at all anywhere in the build, just to make sure we can maximize our healing, and especially since Fury is not an issue at all. So that's the rundown for the build, skills, Paragon, as well as the gear and everything. I hope y'all got a good chance to look at everything. I know a lot of people have asked, exactly what items I'm running and what the stats are. So that should give you a good idea of everything I've got going on. Also should give you some insight into my version of a physical spender build for the Immortal King set. But bear in mind, there's lots and lots of options in terms of building this with skills as well as gear. So there's currently a Grift 52 completion with a spenderless fire build from a guy named Martin, who posted in the forums as well. So lots of options. You can experiment with whatever you want. I highly encourage it. I've seen Seismic Slam complete Grift 50. My build's completed 51. I've seen a charge version complete 52. So tons and tons of availability here to experiment. I really encourage everybody to get on the PTR and test stuff out, try it out for yourself. Last thing I want to talk about before we get off here today is going to be the new patch that's coming to the PTR. There's some really exciting stuff, hopefully next week. I'm not sure if it's going to be that soon, but they're going to be adding a new pair of pants to the Immortal King set. So it's going to be called Immortal King's Call. It's going to be pants. So you're going to be able to achieve 6-piece Immortal King without the weapon, which means you could use a Furnace, Heart Slaughter, Maximus, the world will be your oyster. Be able to try out all kinds of stuff. Now don't fret. These pants that grant Wrath of the Berserker all runes are going to be created as a bracer. So this pant is going to be moved to a bracer, and we're going to get Immortal King's bracers, or pants, I'm sorry, to be able to use all 6 pieces on gear. Now, if you're blessed, like I am, and you have a really nice Immortal King's Boulder Breaker, the first thing I'm going to do is slap on some Tasker and Theo and see what happens. So that's the future of the patch. That's going to be a little preview on my future videos. I'm really going to hold off right now because this is going to change. This build is going to be altered soon. So when the next patch comes out, it's going to be a pretty sweeping change, and we're going to go back through, evaluate where focus and restraint are. The damage is still there. Test out lots of combinations in terms of gear and weapon choices once we've got the availability and the flexibility. So again, if you watch the video, really appreciate you tuning in. I'm going to be streaming, not daily, but pretty frequently on my Twitch channel, which I'll link below. I've also got a Twitter account I made specifically to let everybody know when I was streaming. And hopefully you guys enjoyed this. This is the first YouTube video I've made other than, just the Grift 51 completion I have. This is all pretty new to me. And if you've got questions or comments, or you'd like to leave suggestions about how I can improve the channel, or anything that might strike your fancy, just leave a comment below. This is all for me today, so I'm going to be signing off here. Thanks for checking it out. Have a good one.